Hi, and welcome to another exciting edition of Cambridge InsideOut. My name's Robert Winters.
My name is Susana Segat, and
I'm Marjorie Decker.
here we are.
Hey, Marjorie.
Yes. Hey, Marjorie. Not only are you Marjorie Decker, you are the only state representative in the Commonwealth that represents only Cambridge, Massachusetts.
This is true. I feel very lucky to have that seat.
We are very lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Well done. Let's see. So,
Let's talk.
Happy spring,
I got nothing
everyone.
on my mind. What about you?
Well,
bet
actually,
you do.
I'm really happy that Marjorie's here because as representative, she got to see last week the passage of the House budget.
We did.
And since we know so little about what the House budget has, and since she knows probably everything about it,
Not sure about everything here. There's a high standards, but
In
I
other words-
think enough
We
of
can
what's important to
grill her.
Cambridge.
So you have the floor, Marjorie.
well, first, I want to just talk about the Commonwealth's budget process,
Mm-hmm.
because it's complicated to most people
Yeah.
who
no,
aren't
it's-
engaged in it. So what happens every year is in January, the governor puts out his budget.
Right.
And there's great fanfare, and it's advertised all over the place, and it's distributed to the House of Representatives and to the Senate. Everyone looks at the governor's budget, pretty much throws it away.
Recycles. We recycle.
They recycle.
You know,
And then
come on, they
that's
don't
it.
really throw it
Yeah,
away.
they really do.
All right.
And then the budget
The real
process.
budget. If you're in the House, then the real budget begins. If you're in the Senate, then the real budget begins.
So then the House Ways and Means Committee considers what the governor did in his budget
Mm-hmm.
and what the representatives want and what their districts want, and produce a budget of their own.
Right. So legislators have the opportunity to meet with the chair of House Ways and Means. So you have the Speaker of the House and the chair of House Ways and Means. Those are the two influential people in the House of Representatives. And so I had the opportunity to meet with both the Speaker and with the House Chair to say, these are the issues that are really important to my district and I think important throughout the Commonwealth. I use the
Well, can you
governor's
tell
budget.
us what they are?
Yeah, so, and as I say, I also use some of the governor's budget to look at. Issues around early childhood education. The governor put out 15 million more for the waiting list, so I had supported that. And
The waiting list for
to take children off the waiting list who are
who need vouchers.
who need vouchers for childcare. I think we mentioned I had the privilege of sitting on a statewide commission the Speaker had appointed me to on looking at the issues around early childhood education and care. So I also requested to have a pilot study. The governor had also requested this pilot study, but I had taken his work and I actually expanded on what I would like to see, how we prioritize communities around the state, starting with what we now in the State House called gateway communities. And looking at our more lower income communities and prioritizing them to give them grants to bring all of their stakeholders together to look at what would it take and who would have to be involved to really implement junior kindergarten for all children.
Statewide.
But starting with, so I prioritize, let's prioritize with giving those grants to communities that are have the lowest income families. One of the other things that I made an attempt to do, because the number of people who are receiving TAFDC benefits, otherwise known as welfare or cash assistance.
What does TAFDC stand for?
Transitional assistance for families and children.
Okay.
Pass test number one. Good job.
There we go.
And for many families it comes in the form of cash assistance. So for a family of three who has no other income, $615, give or take a dollar or two, is the maximum cash assistance that they will receive. The rolls went down this year, so the governor's budget cut out $38 million from that line item. I worked with many advocates around the state and said, this is an opportunity to level fund this line item, so let's keep giving all the same amount of money. We're not asking for an increase, but let's reinvest that $38 million into the cash assistance grants, and this would have provided families for the first time since 2000 a cash assistance increase. So they would have seen maybe about $70 a month more, which goes a long way at pulling people out of poverty. The other thing that I had advocated for, so that was not successful, we should say that.
Well, that's later on in the story.
What was successful was the asking the House Ways and Means to put back I was able to get $4 million back into the budget that had been cut for what's called a $40 rental assistance for families who are not in subsidized housing. They received $40 to help them pay their rent if they're living in market rents and they have no subsidies at all. So one of my amendments in the budget was to advocate for putting that $4 million back, and we did get that. There were other amendments or things that I wanted in the budget. The issue of, and I think I might have talked about this the last time I was here, the emergency assistance housing.
Mhm.
So right now, the administration, the governor's administration, has this language that defines that if you and your children want emergency assistance, you have to document and prove that you've spent 24 hours in a place not meant for human habitation. And on the one hand, they're trying to find a line there that says we're afraid of being flooded with families who need emergency assistance, because there's a lot more than in which the resources are there. So I think that has been some of the line they've tried to create. My response back with many of the advocates around the state is, let's listen to the language, that we are going to force families to document that they have stayed in a place not meant for human habitation for 24 hours. So that's staying in a car, that's staying in an
If you're
emergency
lucky.
room. And
Of course, if they were in my VW bus, that would be completely okay for human habitation.
we'd have to go take a look at it. You know, it's heartbreaking to me. And the language that I had suggested was that we say that they are imminently close to spending 24 hours, like that they are on the verge
Right.
of spending. So that's something we're still working on, and it really is. It's a resource issue. We need to invest more resources in housing and shelter, and in the voucher system and affordable rent. So it's the challenge we have here in Cambridge, and it's the challenge throughout the Commonwealth. I also supported an amendment that would have supported the Cambridge Health Alliance. The Cambridge Health Alliance continues to not get the reimbursements it needs at the federal level, and it's also clear that it's not everyone in the legislature feels as protective of the Cambridge Health Alliance's resources
Now, the
as we do.
Cambridge Health Alliance is one of the few public hospitals left, right?
The only public hospital in Massachusetts. That does not mean that it is the only hospital serving underserved populations.
But their funding is different because of that.
That's right.
They have more needs.
That's right. And the federal government is not providing them the reimbursement rates that they need, and the state hasn't always released in a timely way the reimbursements that they're entitled to.
Right.
And so that we could do a whole 1-hour show on healthcare in Massachusetts, the Healthcare Connector, because I sit on the Healthcare Finance Committee.
Oh, you do? Let's do that sometime.
And what the
I mean,
state
no
of the
one
Cambridge
wants to
Health
hear it,
Alliance.
but people should know.
It's important. We're still trying to figure it out. Obamacare and the Healthcare Connector, there's still a lot of challenges for us to figure out how to provide affordable and accessible, high-quality care. We're still working. That's still work in progress, and we're seeing that play out very much here in Massachusetts.
My recollection is when the healthcare system as it is now was instituted in Massachusetts, it kind of changed the equation for the Cambridge Health Alliance, which used to be very dependent on the what's it called, free care pool. And when everything changed, a lot of the patients who come to Cambridge Health Alliance were now sort of choosing other places, so everything got shuffled
right.
around, and we haven't really stabilized.
No, that's right. And that pool of money and patients actually allowed us to sort of mask how,
Yes.
not us, but I think the Alliance to sort of mask how much in the hole we really are.
Yeah.
But that is a great topic that I'd be happy to come back and talk more about.
Excuse me just 1 second.
You're gonna grab
Right
coffee?
back. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm gonna get a coffee.
Cream, no sugar, I'm good. Ice actually would be great too.
All right, Marjorie, let me ask you a quick,
Yeah.
because you mentioned, the activities goes on right now within the state legislature, but excluding the state senate. So is it similar in the state process how it is in the federal government, where appropriation matters originate in the House?
It's who does it first. So
Right.
it's really the governor comes out with what's called House 1, and then the next year it's called House 2.
All right.
That's a budget. So depending on who you are and what you like in that budget, you think that's where you start.
All right.
The House itself, the House of Representatives and the Ways and Means Committee, they really do craft their own budget based on what they believe are the priorities of members of the House of Representatives. Some of that will reflect the governor's, some of it won't.
Right.
But the Senate also then has another process. So the governor is first, the House is first, then the Senate does their own process, and then
Right.
what we will see. So
So
Senate
is the Senate taking what the House is doing, or are they just doing completely separate?
again, depending on who you are.
Yeah.
If you think that there's a lot there in the House that you think is worth keeping and that really is commensurate with the Senate priorities. So some of that stuff, those line items, they're taking right over. Often they're looking at what their budget was last year. So whatever the Senate produced, they're going to look at that budget document first. Whatever the House Ways and Means produced, they're going to look at that budget document first. They're not really looking at each other's as the first draft. They're looking at their previous budget. And this really then plays out in the conference committee, where you have members of the House, the Senate, working on what they think is a compromise for the legislature, the third branch of government,
Right.
and then that goes back and the governor decides what he thinks of it.
My recollection, and not that I follow state level things as closely as I follow city things, but is that sometimes this whole process, I mean, so the House passed the budget just the other day.
Yes. 3 days, we managed to appropriate $365 billion or something to that effect, maybe a little
Right.
more.
Okay. But now that doesn't mean the budget's all set, because
No.
now we'll have to go through this. So when, is there a sort of an approximate date when everything gets
Oh, yeah.
resolved and conference committees typically?
July 31st is when it all
Is
has
it-
to be
is it a-
resolved and voted on.
Now, are there some years where there's sort of an 11th hour exception where we pretend it's all done, but it doesn't, we do like a continuing resolution while people still hash it out?
I'm not sure. I'm thinking maybe I can recall 1 year when I was an aide that might have happened. I don't think
Yeah.
that's the
That's
case.
not
It's a really
typical,
big
yeah.
deal to not keep the appropriations going and to then go,
Okay.
what you'd have to do is a supplemental budget to keep all these state agencies, with the
Right.
salaries going and the services going. So no, I do believe, at least in my first year, but I do believe that this is a hard, fast deadline. And so right now, in 2 weeks, so over the next 2 weeks, the Senate is working on releasing their budget document, and the senators will have a couple of days to put together amendments, just so people also know the process.
Right.
The insanity of the process is that once the House budget document was released to members of the House of Representatives, we then have a couple of days in which we are slammed. When I tell you that I get probably 100 emails an hour over these next 2 to 3 days that we have to file amendments.
Right.
So that's, and Susana can tell you, it's literally, and it depends on what district you come from. You would be not surprised that the district that I represent, Cambridge, it is overwhelming. I'm still spending this week, people are like, oh, the budget's over, you're great. I'm like, no, I mean, we're actually going back to the hundreds of emails, phone calls, and visits,
Right.
because I have people from Cambridge who actually just will love coming to the State House and
Sure.
popping in, and advocates from all over the state will walk in. So we had 1,200 amendments to this budget, which was the most that they
Yeah.
think they've seen ever. Out of those 1,200 amendments, though,
But they were all of them for one guy, right? Yeah.
right, well, one or two people may have the real final say in this, but
Right.
no, it's, so the amount of people who are calling me by communicating with me is really the word, whether it's through social media, email, phone calls, or coming in, or through advocates, asking me to either sign on to so-and-so's amendment,
Right.
sign on to so-and-so's amendment, and we're in the process, my office was in the process of deciding which amendments am I going to take the lead sponsor on, and there's a whole strategy to decide what you take the lead sponsorship on and what you sign on to, and it's just,
And does it matter? Does it matter if you signed on to something or not? Do you have a sense of that?
I think it gives yes, I think, depending on if it's a real local issue and there's only 2 people signing on, then no, they don't expect the members to sign on in droves. The amendment that I had that would take the cash assistance for families on TFDC, we had, I think,
That was a
at
big
the end of the
deal,
day,
yeah.
54 people signed on, and that is a big deal because you also know that the issue of welfare has been used as a lightning rod
Right.
to hurt members who believe that government is a safety net, by some members who believe that nobody should actually
Right.
receive government assistance. I mean, the really the polarization and the lightning rod that this issue represents. So you have 54 people who said, yes, I'm going to sign
And
on
that's
to
a
your
lot of
amendment.
people for an
And
amendment.
it's a lot of work because, so what I was doing at the 11th hour was texting my colleagues saying, hey, I want to make sure you didn't miss this, because you do miss amendments when your email is being flooded with, and you're trying to keep up with what's this amendment, who's filing it, and then you have to get to the staff person who works for that representative, hope that they actually got the message that you left, and then sort of, at one point you just go into a bunker and say, I just need to organize what I, at the moment, know is a priority, and then wait for the next round of priorities that my constituents are going to call me with.
And now with technology, there's a deadline. If the clock
That's
strikes, the computer shuts down and you can't file anymore, right?
You can't file anymore. What you can do is go into the clerk's office the next day and sign your name onto the book. But that means, so I got a few phone calls from constituents saying, you didn't sign on to that amendment. I'd say, well, actually we did. We just had to go down to the book and sign
I
on to
see.
it because either the other aide didn't get our call or we didn't make the call in time, and then the time it takes to actually get it all on the computer, because you can't file an amendment. Once you file an amendment, you can't add anyone electronically, so you really do want everyone's names on the amendment to
Right.
show. So I think it matters to the degree that, I don't know if I would have gotten the $4 million back for rental assistance if we didn't have that many people on the amendment. We didn't get the cash assistance increase, which would have been, and just I want people to keep in mind that the poverty level is a little over $1,600. For anyone who thinks that people are just on welfare and they're just living large, the maximum family of 3 gets $600. That's with no other income, and the poverty level is $1,600. And I believe that cash assistance has not been adjusted for inflation since 1988.
Wow.
Yeah, so people are not living, so that the actual stretch of that dollar has decreased by at least 50%.
So why does that not pass?
Because while 38 million was cut from the line item, it's because the number of people receiving that assistance went down. They decided to use that money in other areas. One thing I want to say that I found amazing and inspiring. So once you file all these amendments, you go into then vote on the budget. And what the chair of Ways and Means does is takes the chairs of committees that are
Who is the chair of Ways and Means?
Brian Dempsey from
Right.
Haverhill.
Okay.
And what they do is they say, okay, they put all of these amendments into various categories: human services, housing, veterans, and then they say, okay, in room 346, everybody who has an amendment in these categories, and you have a book that tells you what category your amendment was fitting into, and you go into a room and you sit there with a chair of Ways and Means, and usually the committee chairs who are involved in that area of expertise, and then you sit there with all the staff. And when I say sit there, you take turns really sitting.
So like early education.
Early education comes under Department of Education. You go in there and you listen to
So
even
all of the budget amendments that have to do with early education are put into one
all put it
booklet.
with higher ed and with out of school
All
time.
education.
All education with career.
So they're discussed by topic.
They're discussed by topic, and what you realize is that the issue of early ed, which is very important to
Right.
me and to our community.
Yep.
There's also about 50 to 100 different early ed issues that people are advocating for. I mean, what I really have appreciated, even though I've known this, is to see, while my amendments aren't getting the priority that I think they should, nobody's in there advocating for the most part for insignificant things.
Right.
It's things that really do change people's lives. It may not be in the area that I have prioritized or in this community, but legislators really are in there trying to advocate for the strength of their community and doing it in statewide too. It's not just their city. There's a lot of, I'd say a lot of statewide advocacy on issues. And so while on the one hand it can be deflating, because you think these families haven't had an increase since 2000, and this is how else do we pull people out of poverty?
Mm-hmm.
Well, somebody else is advocating for a jobs program, and someone else is advocating for going back to the earlier debate around minimum wage. There's different paths of getting there, and so it is I think awe-inspiring as well as frustrating, but I don't walk away feeling, some people I think can walk away feeling cynical about it. What I have seen is that people really are stepping up to advocate to strengths of what we think the needs are of the Commonwealth.
So the good part to bundling all these amendments is that you get to see the different ways that people have
That's right.
trying to have solutions for it.
So
that's a
often,
good thing.
often you'll go into what's called this caucus, even if you don't have an amendment in there, just so you can hear. And it's really how you get the best sense of sort of what people are trying to do with this budget and what legislators are trying to do.
Right. Now, legislators are fundamentally allocating money, but still it's the various departments that are then kind of executing the programs.
Right.
So you have a certain amount of control by basically saying we're going to allocate X amount of dollars, but you can't always get the programs to sort of play out exactly the way you
No, right. The
Wow.
governor decides. So, one of the things that I had been advocating for this year was the release of wages for human service workers, and in particular workers at domestic violence shelters.
What does that mean, release of wages?
So it's in what's called this Chapter 527 fund, and it's in the governor. So Administration and Finance, which is a branch of the governor, it's their budget office. It's their Louis for the city, their Louis DePasquale,
Yeah.
and they're sitting there. And once the money's been allocated to various state agencies, they're actually deciding where the money should go or when to release that money.
Yeah.
And sometimes they will hold back releasing money that was appropriated because because something else has just come up, because DCF now is in crisis and we need to get more, money over to them right away. I mean, just there's various things that come up. So they don't release all of the money that's been appropriated right away either, even when the budget's been adopted.
Sure.
So we don't have very much time left, so I don't want to leave people with the impression that because the House budget is finished, that the budget is done.
Right.
This is like halfway through.
Right, so now I'm working with senators, both that represent Cambridge. I work closely with Senator Jalen, I work closely with Senator DiDomenico, I work closely with Senator Petrocelli, and then I also look to other senators who I know are going to carry issues that I think are really important.
Because now the House budget that's been voted on, the Senate gets a chance to present their budget.
That's
so
right.
they hold the House budget aside and come up with their own budget.
That's right.
So
we were
you
just
need
talking
to.
about that.
Okay.
Yep.
And once that's done, what happens?
So we actually just talked about that. So we
Okay.
said we go to the Senate does their budget, and then there's this conference committee, and then that's where all the negotiations take place. But it's important to also have senators who you have a good working relationship with. I do want people to know that in this House budget, one of the amendments that I was on and worked very closely with my colleagues was the ethanol amendment, because we talked about this last year. So what passed in the House budget was a 2.5 year moratorium. We want it 7 to 10 years.
This is back before, not.
Well, we had the original one that the governor,
He put it.
But that was just
he
to
put it in
buy some
abeyance
time,
for a
too.
couple of
Right,
years.
right. Well, we could have, it would have been, I think, indefinite, but he amended it so that it would only give us 2 years. So that
Right.
time is almost up.
Right.
This goes on to extend this moratorium of ethanol, the carrying of ethanol, by 2.5 years. 1 year from July, there will be a state safety highway study that says that they actually will decide whether or not they need to extend the moratorium. So we were able to get the 2.5 year moratorium plus this study that will decide if we need, one, what do we need in order to carry ethanol safely, and I don't believe that you really can at this time do that, but two, whether or not they recommend having a longer moratorium. Now that
Did
again,
that amendment pass?
that amendment passed in the
So it's in the House
that was
budget.
the compromise. Our original amendment wasn't 2.5 years. That was the compromise, meaning that's what we had the support to pass. Now it'll go to the Senate, and the Senate will have their own strategy, and they may decide to seek a 7-year extension, and they have in the past been successful. So there's a reason to believe that possibly that they will do that again, and then the Senate and the House and Conference Committee will then negotiate on what that looks like.
Great.
And all of this.
And we have to hope the governor will sign that into law if we get there again.
Right. Now, again, my recollection, correct me if I'm wrong, is that so even after the House and Senate have agreed and they've passed a budget and they've all agreed on here, then the governor either signs it, but even if he signs it, he can line item veto.
He can also amend, right.
He can amend.
And he can send back
But he
and
can't
Send
say.
back.
He can send back. He can't. He add. He can't add funding, right? He can suggest, or he can veto and then say, "I'm not going to sign this until you send me more money for something." But that's usually not how it works, right?
No.
He usually says.
No, at this point, he
The
usually says what he doesn't think should be in the budget, and then it becomes another layer of negotiations between.
And this is his last budget, so who knows what he'll do.
Right. But then, again, as we head into the summer months, then there is this process, as I recall, where the legislature often overrides vetoes. And that continues on for some time, right?
Right, but all of this comes to an end by July 31st.
Even the overrides?
Well, it's July
Oh, I didn't
31st,
realize.
there's no more formal sessions.
Yeah.
All right.
So that means that anything that's on the floor can be stopped by one person objecting, and you really can't have roll calls, right? So you
Right.
can't, it's really tough.
Okay.
After July 31st.
So in other
Really
words,
comes to a
so
halt.
the actual signing by the governor would ideally happen well before the July 31st, so there'd be at least a little wiggle
Well,
room
that's the
for
pressure.
overrides?
That's the pressure to have the Senate move quickly. It's the
Right.
pressure to have the conference committee move quickly, because if they stall, it gives the governor the opportunity to say, hey, I'm out of time.
Right. I see.
It's very
And-
interesting.
And just to be clear, I mean, I think that, he was asking me, have they actually gone beyond July
Mhm.
31st? And I said,
Oh, yeah.
it's in everyone's interest to get to July 31st for a lot of reasons, including the responsibility of having to make sure that life goes on in the Commonwealth.
Right.
But it's
Well,
also
that
an
the
election
budgets
year.
go on.
Right.
It's an election year for everybody. So I think that people also have that additional sense of the gravity
Get
of
me
that.
out of here.
Yeah.
Right. So in other words, even in the odd years, it's a sort of a different atmosphere come budget time. I guess.
I'll say this is my first full term here, so
All right. Okay. All right.
I'm
So
hoping
how-
to return to a next one. So
Well, Well, thank you so much. We're almost out of time, but we really appreciate hearing this. And maybe once the budget is finally done, you can give us a little analysis of what happened with
Yeah.
your stuff. And did the Senate move it? Did it go through conference?
Yeah, and we can
Did-
talk about sub-budgets and bond bills and how we get more money in other ways.
And then the healthcare
Yes.
stuff too.
Healthcare stuff's really important, so yeah, happy to keep
Excellent.
talking about that. Thank you guys
so
for
much.
doing this, and thanks for doing the show.
Okay.
Representative
Great.
Marjorie Decker.
Thank you.
So glad she's here. Is
Thanks.
Cambridge inside?
Out.
Am I supposed to say something?
No.